They want fear. We will answer with fire. If we wait for perfect clarity, we will stand on rubble. We are not just reclaiming the North. We are planting our flag in their nightmares. From this moment, every village touched by this fire, we rebuild brick by brick, person by person, even if it takes the rest of our lives. This is the speech of President Ibrahim Traoré in the context of the recent security crisis in Burkina Faso. What if the place you call home could be turned into ashes before dawn? That chilling reality is not the tale from the past, but the tragedy that continues to haunt the Sahel. In recent months, northern Burkina Faso has faced attacks so ferocious that entire villages vanished overnight. The insurgency's fire claimed the lives of over 50 soldiers and an untold number of civilians in Djibo and Dargo. The conflict has already displaced 2 million individuals from their homes. A grim question looms over the nation: who will be next? And yet, in this darkness, one figure has stepped into the fire. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, a young captain who rose not only to the presidency of Burkina Faso, but to the front lines themselves. To some, he is a leader who dares to fight like the late Thomas Sankara, embodying a defiance Africa has not seen in decades. To others, he is the only shield between his people and oblivion. But is this enough? Can one man's courage deliver safety to an entire nation? Or is this only the beginning of a deeper struggle across Africa? Stay with us. This is more than news. You are witnessing history as it unfolds. Join us by subscribing as Africa's narrative continues to be shaped. Calmness preceded the violent outbreak in the night. In a village near Djibo, children were asleep when masked men slipped out of the forest. They did not arrive with words, they arrived with fire. Within minutes, homes became torches and families ran barefoot into the dark. When the smoke cleared at dawn, nothing was left but ashes and the echo of unanswered screams. News traveled fast. In the capital, Ouagadougou, advisors gathered in the war room, their faces pale as satellite images of burning roofs glowed across the screens. The question was not if the next village would fall, but when. This was not an isolated strike. It was part of a campaign of terror that had claimed more than 50 soldiers in Dargo only weeks earlier. This was a component of a larger pattern that had already made refugees of more than 2 million citizens. For a country with a population under 25 million, this was an astonishing figure. Standing in the middle of the room was Ibrahim Traoré. Unlike the politicians before him, he was not detached. He had once worn the uniform of a soldier in the north, felt the sting of shrapnel, and carried comrades to their final breath. Now, as president, he refused to hide behind protocol. He stared at the images of the burning Djibo and spoke with a voice that cut through the silence. They want fear. We will answer with fire. His generals shuffled nervously. Intelligence was incomplete. The insurgents moved like shadows. They were not merely rebels, but part of a network funded, armed, and advised by foreign interests. Whispers spoke of a new commander known only as the Sickle, a man whose cruelty was matched by his strategic brilliance. Rumors suggested he had been trained in 5 different war zones, marking his presence by leaving a machete in the center of each village he destroyed. An officer pleaded for caution, stating they could not act without confirmation. However, Traoré dismissed the concern. If we wait for perfect clarity, we will stand on rubble. His command was final. Operation Northern Storm would begin in 36 hours. The news spread quickly through the barracks. Soldiers awoke to find a leader among them, not in gilded attire, but in plain clothes, eyes hardened by memory. You are not going north to fight men, he told them. You are going to fight fear, and fear does not bleed. It fades only when you refuse to run. The words carried through radios and prayers, whispered again and again until they became more than orders. They became conviction. Meanwhile, intercepted radio chatter revealed the enemy's own arrogance. Tonight, we send them a message. Tomorrow, we make them beg. Traoré listened without a word, his jaw tight. While he had experience fighting insurgents, this situation was unique. It was not merely a rebellion. It was a theater of fear designed to convince the world that Burkina Faso was weak, leaderless, and doomed. To counter such an idea required more than bullets. It required a symbol, maps unfolded, drones redirected. The war room brimmed with urgency. But in the midst of strategy and tension, Traore took a quiet walk to the balcony. Below, the city stirred awake, markets opening, children on their way to school, mothers carrying water jars. The illusion of peace pressed against his heart. He closed his eyes, recalling his father's village reduced to dust when he was a boy. He remembered that no army intervened and justice was never served. He vowed that this time, such silence would not happen again. Upon his return, the plan was finalized. The strike would target the insurgent base in the Sahel, where the sickle was thought to be meeting with his commanders. "We are not just reclaiming the north," Traore declared. "We are planting our flag in their nightmares." The room erupted with agreement. Aircraft were fueled. Soldiers sharpened blades. Radios hummed with encrypted frequencies. Yet beneath the momentum lurked a shadow no one wished to name. What if the insurgents were already waiting, informed by traitors within? After all, a retired general had been spotted in the suspicious company, his hands shaking those of known smugglers. Could treachery have already infiltrated the very core of the republic? The preparations were complete, and troops were on the move. Vehicles sped through the darkness, their lights consumed by the expansive desert. At the center of it all was Traore, calm, resolute, a man walking willingly into the fire. But the fire had its own design. And as the operation moved forward, a chilling truth began to surface. The enemy was not just hiding in forests or mountains. The enemy might already be inside the system itself. The desert was silent, almost too silent when the helicopters touched down. It was just after midnight, and the moon cast a pale silver light across the Sahel's dry expanse. Traore stepped onto the dust, boots sinking into sand that carried the weight of centuries of war. His men looked at him in disbelief. His men were incredulous as they looked at him. A president had never before participated in such a perilous mission. Yet there he stood, helmet in hand, gazing at the horizon. Their target was a crumbling mining compound set to host the sickle and his circle of commanders. Intelligence had traced their movements here, deep in the wilderness where few dared to tread. The soldiers expected resistance, guards, sentries, warning shots. But what greeted them was an eerie stillness. No footsteps, no patrols, only the hollow carcass of buildings looming in the dark. The first shot shattered that stillness. It came not from the compound, but from behind. A sniper's round ripped through the night, and chaos erupted. Shadows rose from the sand like spirits of vengeance. Gunfire exploded in bright, scorching flashes. Each burst revealed masked insurgents who were already in their positions. The soldiers had been lured directly into an ambush. "Fall back to positions." Traore's voice rang through the radio, steady as stone. Bullets sliced the air around him, but he moved with a calm that seemed unnatural. To his men, he was not just giving orders. He was showing them that fear could be faced and broken. One officer fell beside him, blood soaking his shoulder. "They knew we were coming," he gasped. Traore pressed his hand against the wound, eyes scanning the horizon where a thin line of purple bled into black. "Not yet," he replied. "Dawn is ours." The battle raged on. The fighting continued relentlessly. Explosions destroyed the compound walls, sending dust into the air like smoke signals in the darkness. Soldiers engaged in close-quarters combat, fighting from one room to the next in the narrow hallways, their rifles echoing like thunder in a canyon. Amid the chaos, they discovered maps pinned to walls marked with red symbols, villages, wells, schools, all future targets. It was not random violence. It was a blueprint for collapse designed to turn Burkina Faso into fragments of fear. Then came the voice, calm, venomous, intimate. "You should not have come here, Traore. Out of the shadows stepped a tall, lean figure, his face masked with a scarf. The sickle. His presence seemed to drain the room of air. He did not raise his weapon. He raised words. "You are not here to lead. You are here to die. A martyr whose people will follow into the grave." Silence hung heavy for a moment. Traore then stepped forward, without raising a gun, using only his voice. "My people do not die for nothing. They die so the next child may live. Can you say the same?" The sickle tilted his head. "Children, I was one once. No one came for me. The Republic forgets. It always forgets." "No," Traore answered softly. "You forgot. You forgot what it means to fight for more than yourself." The standoff ended not with words, but with an explosion of violence. A soldier lunged and the room burst into gunfire. The sickle escaped through a hidden tunnel, wounded but alive. The discovery of his plans, however, was a significant breakthrough. It provided evidence that the war was not chaotic, but a calculated act of treason, supported by foreign funds and internal betrayal. As the sun finally rose, a quiet calm fell over the battlefield. Amid the rubble, a small shed door creaked open. From it emerged a young girl, no older than 10, her face streaked with soot. In her hand, she held a torn piece of cloth, the faded colors of the national flag. She said nothing, only stretched it out toward Traore. He knelt, taking the cloth gently, his voice low. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head, but her downcast eyes revealed a deeper truth. Her family was gone. Traore tucked the cloth into his vest, stood tall, and turned to his men. "From this moment, every village touched by this fire, we will reconstruct everything, one brick and one person at a time, even if it requires the remainder of our lives." There was no cheering or applause, just soldiers standing taller, with newfound belief in him. As helicopters carried the injured into the early morning light, a flag made from scraps found in the compound was raised defiantly over the debris. Imperfect, torn, but unbroken. The nation waited for news. In Ouagadougou, word spread faster than official broadcasts. "The president fought with us," the soldiers whispered. "He stood in the fire." Crowds poured into the streets, old men beating drums, women waving claws, children barefoot with handmade signs. They believed for the first time in years that their leader was not a distant name, but a living shield. Yet even amid their celebration, a darker truth lingered. The sickle had escaped, and wherever he bled into the desert, he carried with him the knowledge that betrayal had already hollowed the Republic from within. When the reckoning started, the dust from the Sahel had hardly settled. Operation Northern Storm had penetrated deep into insurgent territories, uncovering traitors and disrupting their supply lines. Its impact, however, extended well beyond the combat zone. For the people of Burkina Faso, the aftermath was not merely about victory, it was about survival. In the capital, a retired general was led away in the silence of night, wrists bound in steel. He had once dined in the presidential palace, but intelligence revealed his betrayal, funneling arms, money, and mercenaries into the insurgent cause. No press conference announced his arrest. There were no cameras flashing, only a quiet knock at 2 in the morning, and a man who whispered with a bitter smile, "You are too late. The fire has already spread." Such betrayals cut deeper than bullets. They proved that the insurgency was not simply an enemy from the forests, but a sickness within the nation's own veins. Traore was aware of this, as were the citizens. This conflict was not just about land. The very soul of the Republic was at stake, and while soldiers fought, civilians bore the weight. In Jibo, thousands who had fled the fighting lined up at makeshift camps. Mothers cradled children with eyes sunken from hunger. Wells lay dry, schools reduced to rubble. Entire families vanished into statistics. More than 2 million citizens had already been displaced, a staggering tide of humanity moving not towards safety, but into uncertainty. Humanitarian agencies whispered of famine and disease, yet their access remained fragile. trapped between conflict zones and political suspicion. Rebuilding began, but slowly. One village, completely burned down, was rebuilt by volunteers in 6 days. 500 houses were constructed with determined effort. In other places, engineers worked quickly to repair roads and wells, frequently with armed protection. A new school opened its doors in the north, where a teacher who once fled now welcomed pupils back to desks. A boy, no older than 8, read aloud from a weathered textbook. "Burkina Faso is the land of those who do not fear." His voice quivered, then steadied, and the room rose in applause, not just for him, but for a nation refusing to vanish. Yet hope walked side by side with unease. In villages where insurgents had once ruled, suspicion ran deep. Which neighbor had given them shelter? Which official had whispered secrets? Among the Fani communities, resentment fed. Many accused the government of targeting them unfairly, branding them as collaborators simply by heritage. The struggle was no longer confined to firearms. It now involved issues of identity, trust, and a sense of belonging. On the political stage, Traoré's stature grew immensely. People hailed him as a modern Sankara, a leader who was not afraid to be on the front lines. His defiance of France and his embrace of the Sahel alliance with Mali and Niger painted him as a spearhead of a new anti-colonial wave. Russia's shadow loomed in the background, supplying weapons and words of support, while Western voices grew sharper in their criticism. But power once tasted is not easily released. Elections once promised for the near future were pushed further away, postponed until at least 2029. Opposition voices were muffled, journalists silenced, protests curtailed. Traoré argued that survival demanded unity, that democracy could wait until the fire was extinguished. Many believed him. Others feared that the republic was trading one danger for another. For the elders observing, it felt like history repeating itself. They had witnessed leaders emerge as heroes, only to transform into authoritarian figures. They had seen the hope of freedom dissolve into long periods of corruption and military takeovers. And now they asked themselves, was this different? Or was this the same story replayed with new faces and new slogans? In homes rebuilt from ash, in camps crowded with the displaced, in palaces where strategy maps stretched across tables. One question lingered. Was Burkina Faso truly stronger after the storm, or simply scarred in new ways? Because insurgents can be chased into the desert, but ideology cannot be bombed away. It seeps into the cracks left by poverty, injustice, and betrayal. And even as the people rallied behind their president, the knowledge remained. The sickle was still at large. While the effects of Operation Northern Storm were still felt in the Sahel, the international community had already started to react. The name Ibrahim Traoré was spoken in diplomatic circles from New York to Moscow and from Paris to Addis Ababa, eliciting both respect and concern. In Washington, officials spoke cautiously. The United States condemned the insurgent violence, but their statements carried a familiar undertone: concern over democratic backsliding. Traoré's decision to postpone elections until 2029 raised alarms in the corridors of power. To Washington, stability without democracy was a fragile illusion. Yet at the same time, no one could deny that Burkina Faso had become a crucial line of defense against jihadist expansion in West Africa. America's dilemma was clear: how to criticize a leader who stood firm against terror without alienating him into the arms of Russia. France's reaction was sharper, tinged with bitterness. Once the colonial power and a long-standing military ally, Paris was now on the sidelines. A year earlier, French soldiers had been ordered to leave Burkina Faso, their installations shut down and their power diminishing. In Ouagadougou, demonstrators held signs condemning neo-colonialism, their chants reflecting a growing anti-French feeling. To France, Traoré was a dangerous populist. To his supporters, he was the man who had finally broken the chains of dependency. Russia, by contrast, saw opportunity. Kremlin statements hailed Traoré as a defender of sovereignty. Weapons shipments flowed quietly along with advisors under the banner of partnership on African social media. Narratives amplified by Russian outlets painted him as the new standard-bearer of liberation, a successor to Thomas Sankara who would lead a renaissance of African pride. Whether through diplomacy or disinformation, Moscow ensured his presence was felt within Africa itself. The reactions were divided. ECOWAS and the African Union voiced worries about the decline of democracy, cautioning that prolonged military governance could disrupt regional stability. However, Mali and Niger, fellow members of the Sahel Alliance, welcomed Traoré as an ally. Together, they established a coalition that resisted Western influence, contending that security should be prioritized over elections. To their citizens weary of endless insurgent attacks, the rhetoric resonated deeply. Europe called between condemnation and caution, worried about migration flows. Every village burned, every family displaced, risked fueling the tide of refugees heading north. Brussels urged restraint, but its voice struggled to carry weight in a region where influence had long been tied to history and resource contracts. For the people of Burkina Faso, these international chess moves felt distant. What mattered was whether their homes could be rebuilt, whether their children could walk to school without fear. Yet the truth was unavoidable. Their struggle was no longer only local. It had evolved into a symbol, a crucial test in the larger narrative of African geopolitics. Behind every diplomatic declaration, handshake, or penalty, a single question remained unspoken. Did these global powers genuinely care about the people? Or were they only interested in the strategic game being played? As embassies drafted their communiques and foreign powers chose their words carefully, a darker thought haunted Ouagadougou. While the world argued, the sickle was still out there plotting his next move. The guns of Northern Storm had fallen silent. But silence in Burkina Faso was never simple. For every village rebuilt, another whispered of fear. For every well restored, another dried under the weight of displacement. The question was no longer whether Ibrahim Traoré could fight. The world had seen that. The question was whether he could lead his nation into a future that would outlast his own fire. The way forward presents many options. One path suggests strengthening the unity of the Sahel Alliance. This would involve Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso collaborating closely to resist both insurgent threats and outside influence. In this vision, sovereignty is reclaimed not through elections, but through survival with strength drawn from solidarity. Yet this road is narrow, shadowed by dependency on foreign patrons such as Russia. Already whispers warn that trading one empire's influence for another may not free Africa, but merely repaint the chains. Another road beckons toward reconciliation and inclusion. The wounds of Fani communities, often accused of siding with insurgents, cannot be healed by force alone. Without justice, suspicion will remain fertile ground for rebellion. True safety, Traoré himself admitted, is not a speech or a decree. It's a commitment that must be reaffirmed each day. To maintain it, he needs to rebuild trust with the same intensity he uses to rebuild structures. The economic challenges are just as formidable. With millions displaced, farmland abandoned, and trade routes scarred, Burkina Faso's stability depends on more than military victories. Roads must reopen, markets must flourish, and children must dream not only of a survival, but of opportunity. Development, not just defense, will determine whether the republic endures. For the elders who remember the bold voice of Thomas Sankara, there is a haunting familiarity. Sankara once promised self-reliance, dignity, and an Africa. He was silenced by bullets, but his dream lingers. Traoré's rise has rekindled echoes of that vision. Yet history teaches caution. Will he bring Sankara's vision to fruition, or will he fall into the same pattern of power that Africa has witnessed too many times? Across the continent, all eyes are on him. From Cape Town to Cairo, from Lagos to Dar es Salaam, the situation in Burkina Faso is seen as more than just a local issue. It is the question of whether Africa can finally claim its own future on its own terms. Will sovereignty mean true independence, or will it be another chapter in the long play of geopolitics Africa? And for those beyond Africa, especially in the diaspora, the message is clear. The story is not about borders on a map. It is about dignity. It is about whether a people long pushed to the margins can rise scarred but unbroken into the center of their own history. Traore once told his soldiers, "Fear does not bleed. It only fades when you refuse to run." That is the choice before Burkina Faso now, to refuse to run, to plant their flag not only in the nightmares of their enemies, but in the hearts of their children, so that the next generation may inherit not war, but hope. As the Republic stands at this crossroads, however, one question looms above all. Can Burkina Faso transform its devastation into a chance for renewal, or will the conflict erupt once more? The story of a Burkina Faso is not written in ink alone. It is carved in fire, in sacrifice, in the footsteps of millions who refuse to vanish. The ashes of the villages like Jibo, the silent grief of displaced families, and the courage of soldiers who stood their ground are not just tragedies. They are the foundation of a nation's resilience. At the center of it all stands Ibrahim Traoré. To his people, he is more than a president. He is the man who chose to walk into the storm rather than govern from safety. His name has become a symbol of defiance echoing through Africa and beyond. And yet his journey is not a tale of triumph alone. It is also a reminder that leadership involves responsibilities as significant as any military tool. The responsibility of earning trust, ensuring justice, and creating a peace that endures after the conflict ends. For the elders who remember Thomas Sankra's voice, Traoré's ascent feels like a revival of the passionate promise that Africa could be strong and independent. But unlike the dreamer who came before him, Traoré must fight in an era where enemies hide not only in deserts, but in boardrooms, in whispered deals, in networks of betrayal. Whether he can succeed will determine not just the fate of his country, but the meaning of sovereignty in this century. And yet hope endures. Every school rebuilt, every child who lifts their voice in the classroom, every family that plants seeds in soil once scarred by war. These are victories too. They remind us that Burkina Faso is not only surviving, it is insisting on life, insisting on dignity. So we come back to the original inquiry. Is the country finally secure? The straightforward answer is no, not completely. But safety is not a finish line. It is a promise renewed daily. With every act of courage, every hand that refuses to drop the flag, every leader who dares to carry both the scars and the hopes of his people. Ibrahim Traoré has become that figure. But the future will demand more than one man. It will demand a people who refuse to run. If this story moves you, do not let it fade into silence. Share, subscribe, and add your voice, because the history of Africa was muted for too long, and it is time the world heard it loudly. In the comments, let your words rise like a chorus. New Africa, Africa rise. It's time for Africa.